As you can see from the glass behind me, I am sitting in my creative space today, the space where I make mosaics. This is where I try to come a couple of times a week to think, to reflect, to quiet my mind and body while I cut glass and glue broken pieces together in a new way. During these next few weeks, I'm going to invite you to join me on a creative journey. And before you get anxious and turn this video off, this journey will not require any art skills. Because your creativity may flow in different ways. It may flow into baking or cooking or yard work or gardening or laundry or organizing, taking a walk, or simply resting and noticing what is around you. I will be sharing some reflections on scripture each week, and I will invite you to respond in the comments of this video with a photo or a story that captures a theme from scripture. My hope is that we can find new and meaningful ways to connect by noticing what is around us and sharing our lives together in creative ways. Since Easter last week, I have been reflecting on the story of the walk to Emmaus in Luke 24. I've always wondered what the two disciples were talking about before this mysterious stranger joined them on the 7-mile journey to Emmaus. They were leaving Jerusalem and walking home, and even though they probably knew the way well, I imagine they felt lost. I wondered if they were talking about the heaviness of grief, just a couple of days after losing their friend and teacher. I wondered if they were discussing their fear that if the Romans would crucify Jesus, they might also come after his followers. I wondered if they were sharing their disappointment that the person who they thought was going to change the world was buried in a tomb. And now on top of that, his body was missing. Their steps were probably heavier than they had ever been. But suddenly an unfamiliar person came near to them and asked them what they were discussing as they were walking along. And scripture tells us that they stood still, probably startled, and that they were looking sad. And one of them asked, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" In other words, where have you been? How could you not know why we are sad? Why aren't you sad? Is anyone talking about anything other than what happened to Jesus? And then they begin to recount the story of their time with Jesus and the story of their last week. And they say, "Jesus of Nazareth was a prophet mighty in deed and word before God and all the people. And our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive." Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. The unfamiliar person, Jesus, whom they had not yet recognized, then began to interpret for them the familiar words of Scripture. And something catches their attention, something feels familiar. Because as they get near to their home and Jesus begins to walk ahead of them, Scripture tells us that the disciples strongly urged Jesus to stay with them. It's an act of hospitality to this unfamiliar yet strangely familiar, stranger on the road. And once they sat down for dinner, Jesus did what he had done just a few evenings before. He took the bread, he blessed it, and he broke it, and he gave it to them. And it is in this familiar act of hospitality and grace that we are told that their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. This story of the disciples walking on the road to Emmaus is a story of disappointments and hopes, of misunderstandings and understandings, of loneliness and community, of distrust and renewed trust, a time of hunger and a meal shared. I imagine that we can relate to some, if not all, of these feelings and experiences as our lives, our routines, our sense of normalcy and safety have unexpectedly been interrupted by a global pandemic. As I have pondered the story of Emmaus this week and how it intersects with our own lives today, I have been working on making a mosaic of a labyrinth. I love the ancient spiritual practice of following a path in towards the center and then following that same path back out again. It is meditative and prayerful. And whether it is walking a labyrinth with my feet or tracing it with my fingers, as with this one, I am always reminded on this path to center myself and to pay attention to the still, small voice of God. As I have cut glass for this mosaic, I've thought about the paths I've walked and the paths I might walk. I've reflected on what it means to be in community and to feel connected while being physically distanced from other people. I've been inspired to reconnect virtually with some friends who have walked with me on significant parts of my journey. And as I continue to work on this mosaic, I will fill in the empty space with glass, one piece at a time, following that path in and following the path back out. In these days of staying at home, or at least staying close to home, I wonder what paths you are walking. You may be walking physical paths around your neighborhood or on hiking trails. Maybe your path this week has involved baking or cooking a delicious meal. Maybe your path has involved sewing or stitching or seeds or soil or flowers or mulch. Maybe your path has been to and from work as a healthcare provider or an essential employee. But I wonder what kind of paths you are creating or making or traveling this week. Who is on your path with you? What path is calling out to you? I'm going to continue working on this mosaic this week, and I would love to see your photos or stories in the comments below of the paths that you are encountering. both physical or metaphorical. If you're not on Facebook, feel free to send me a photo by email or text, and I'll be glad to add them to the others. My hope is that over these next few weeks, Emmanuel friends of all ages, children, teens, adults, will share images with each other of the things we've made, seen, experienced, or noticed in a new way in these unusual days, as a way to stay connected while we are physically apart. Take care, and I look forward to seeing your paths this week.